The next speaker that I love to announce is Max More, who is a strategic philosopher, and I really like the term, a key founder of the transhumanist movement, and he is now the director of communications of Biostasis Technologies. Welcome, Max.
Where's the handheld mic? Thank you. Hello, everyone. You've been sitting there for at least an hour, so you may be going into stasis in your brains. Take a big breath and get that oxygenation going. I've known Aubrey for a long time. I want to thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. Again, I haven't spoken at one of his conferences since I think it was SENS 5 quite a few years ago. I've known Aubrey for a long time, something like, well, I don't know, well over a quarter of a century, I think, since the 1990s. I think I might have been at that very meeting in Huntington Beach or Newport Beach, wherever it was exactly. Manhattan Beach, thank you, one of those beaches, where Aubrey was inspired to come up with the idea of the 7-pronged approach to aging. So that was a nice thing. I've been involved in aging, anti-aging, life extension for a long, long time, over 40 years, probably closer to 45, which is kind of embarrassing, really, since I was a teenager. It goes way, way back. I can think of in the 1980s, at my room in Oxford, people would come in and they would see rows of vitamin bottles on my shelves, and they think that was pretty strange. At the end of those was the classic old book, which probably most of you have even heard of these days, Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw's Life Extension, A Practical Scientific Approach, which is a big advocate of the free radical theory, which is why all those pills, which I mostly no longer take. But the point of that is really to establish that I've been looking at this area for quite a long time because it's quite relevant to what I want to talk about. I've already been introduced to some of what I do. I ran the Alcohol Life Extension Foundation for almost 10 years. That's considered to be the world's leading cryonics organization, at least for now. If Emil's here, I know he's got ambitions to overtake that. And if you're interested in cryonics, by the way, and you're based in Europe, you really should talk to Emil. Are you in the room? No, maybe not. Well, I'll give an announcement at the end about a meeting we're having where you can actually talk to him. So I ran that for a long time, so I have a lot of idea of the practicalities of cryonics and the difficulties involved, as well as a lot of experience communicating it, which I do in my current position with Biostasis Technologies, a very new organization that's part of a family of organizations funded by basically the same person. We're very grateful to Bill Falloon and Saul Kent, who funded not only these organizations, but most of the research for decades now. They've been extremely dedicated to doing that, and I hope other people will follow along with them. I'll say a little bit about biostasis versus cryonics, because biostasis is actually kind of the term I prefer these days, but it's not a new term. I believe it was invented by Eric Drexler in his 1986 book, Engines of Creation. Cryonics and biostasis aren't exactly the same thing. So cryonics, as you probably got by now, and by the way, thanks to the last two speakers for using a bunch of my material that I can now skip over, give you more time for questions. Biostasis is a broader term than cryonics. Cryonics is essentially human cryopreservation, taking people at the point of legal death, not the same as clinical death or biological death or real death, and then we have to wait for that point, by the way, because of the law. We don't have to do it for pets. We can actually do it before what would be considered clinical death for pets. It's ironic that we can do a better job for animals than we can humans. But normally that's what we have to do. So at that point, we plunge the temperature very rapidly after protecting the cells in various ways. And then the idea is that we're basically putting the dying process on pause, pressing the pause button by stopping all metabolism and storing the patient at minus 320 Fahrenheit or minus 196 Celsius. And at that temperature, you've already got an idea from this, from those twins born after 30 years, really nothing is happening at that temperature. So the idea is you're buying time, essentially involved in what has been called medical time travel. With regular medicine, you're taking someone from one place where they're having a problem to a hospital or clinic where you have more advanced technologies and capabilities. With cryonics, the idea is you're taking someone from today into a future time, one day at a time, with no change in their condition. And at some point in the future, after however many decades this takes, we should have the capability to help them in ways obviously we cannot do today. So there's really two main parts to the cryonics idea, or biostasis in general. One is get the person preserved as well as possible today. And as Tanya quite rightly said, we don't want to rely on advanced, fancy technologies of the future. We want to do the best job we can. But we can't currently reverse that for human beings because we can't even do large organs yet. I'll talk a bit more about that. But in the future, hopefully, they can fix more of these problems. So that's really the second aspect of it. Biostasis is a little bit different. It's really the superset that includes cryonics. So cryonics is one method of doing biostasis, but as the term implies, we're putting the biology into stasis. There are other methods such as chemical preservation, cross-linking with aldehyde, and so on. And these can also be combined with cryopreservation. So we have fancy new terms like vitrifixation, which is a combination of vitrification and chemical fixation. Okay. Oh. It's hiding from me. Here we go. Aha. Okay. Now, I'm talking about cryonics as plan A because I suspect for many of you, if you've heard about cryonics at all and are sympathetic, you think of it as plan B. Basically, the goal is not to die in the first place, right? We want to keep going. Nobody wants to be sitting in a vat of liquid nitrogen. It's not really a lot of fun. But it's a good backup plan. However, I'm going to argue that it should be a #1 priority. It should be the very first thing you do, the first thing you put in place for a number of reasons. And you can see why I talked about my long history, because it's going to be quite relevant here. As Aubrey was saying this morning, most of the world is way too pessimistic about life extension. They think it's just not going to happen. It's science fiction, even though there's a lot of stuff that is happening that should give them a clue, but they're pretty clueless. Or they think it's a horrible idea in the first place. My concern is that some people here may be a little bit too optimistic, and as a result might die. And that'd be very unfortunate, because I like you guys. So please don't do that. So that's why I'm arguing really why cryonics should be your #1 priority. Get that in place, because that's something you can do today. I like to think of cryonics or biostasis in general as one aspect of a life extension plan. So we've been talking mostly here at this conference about the theory and the research, not so much about things you can do today, although obviously there are a lot of things that people are trying. I like to think this in terms of financial planning. If you go to a financial planner and you say, well, shall I buy stocks or bonds or gold? They'll say, whoa, hold on a minute. The very first thing you have to do is to have an emergency fund. You should have 3 or 6 or 12 months of cash available in case of an emergency. So that's usually the first thing that they will say. So in parallel, I'm suggesting that biostasis or cryonics should be your emergency fund. Get that in place now, because you don't know when you're going to need it. You should certainly be doing good diet and exercise and rest and all those social things. And perhaps, to the extent that the risk-reward ratio works out for you, some of these new therapies. But get that biostasis stuff in place first. I like this one. Mainly this is here because I like the image, but she's kind of balancing her portfolio there. So if you don't do that, you're really taking a huge risk. So you might say, oh, well, I'm pretty sure that longevity escape velocity is going to accelerate really fast anytime now, and I don't need to worry about cryonics because I'll be fine. Well, okay, I'm going to pick on Ray Kurzweil here because he's my friend, and because he actually has the balls to give specific predictions that can be falsified. So here's some that have been falsified. This is from his 1999 book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, in which he said he wrote these different scenarios in 10-year blocks, and he thought that by 2019, life expectancy would have passed 100. Oops. By 2029, just a few years from now, it will reach 120. That doesn't seem to have worked out too well. Aubrey mentioned actually earlier this morning that the idea of longevity escape velocity, or the basic idea behind it, is not really new. I can think back to Robert Anton Wilson, the counterculture author of Illuminatus and other books, who wrote, I think it was in Future Life magazine in maybe 1978, something that sounded like very much the same idea. He talked about buying some time until the next development, bought you more time, and then more time, and eventually you'd reach a point where you no longer age. So kind of a similar idea. Unfortunately, Robert Anton Wilson is dead and was not cryopreserved, which makes me very sad, because he introduced me to a lot of good ideas. Now, Aubrey's a lot more sensible than that. He doesn't make absolute predictions, right? He makes conditional predictions. He says, if we invest a certain amount of money in this problem, then we should see a certain result in the next number of years. That's a lot more reasonable. It's not just an absolute prediction, because obviously it depends on a lot of conditions, and the funding is just beginning to happen. So let's look at this longevity escape velocity idea and the curve. Because you're thinking, okay, this curve looks pretty impressive. We're going to zoom up. I don't really need cryonics or biostasis. But first of all, is there a curve? I'm not really seeing one yet. What I'm seeing is, if you look back into the 20th century for both the USA and many parts of the world, we were gaining life expectancy at a pretty impressive rate for a while, about a fifth of a year per year. So that's pretty cool. If we gained a quarter, then a half per year, and 3/4 per year, we would hopefully have reached longevity escape velocity. But that didn't happen. It slowed down, and of course in the USA in particular, and some other places, it actually went down during COVID and for various other reasons. Although at this point, how many people have seen Futurama? The professor from Futurama would break in and say, "Good news, everybody." Well, the good news, you may not have heard this yet. Apparently, according to preliminary figures, between 2021 and 2022, projecting, I think, the first 6 months, it looks like in the USA we gained 1.07 years in 1 year. Wow, we've done it. We can all go home now. Oh, no, not really, because we're just catching up on what we lost before. That's what we want to see, but we want to see that more consistently. So I don't think we've actually got on the edge of the curve yet, but even if, say, in the next few years, we see clear evidence that we're starting that curve, and it's pretty hard to know the shape of the curve from the initial few points, right? Are you sure you're on this part of it, the exciting part of the curve, or are we on that kind of boring tail there? And how old are you? How much are you willing to bet that you don't need this backup plan? In fact, I shouldn't even talk it as a backup plan, because it should be your main plan. So we don't really know what the shape of the curve is. Will it even be a curve? Maybe it'll be, kind of an S-curve, or maybe it'll be a big jump here and then nothing for a while, then a big jump there. It won't necessarily be a smooth curve. So beware of being a little over-optimistic. Now, obviously, things are looking pretty good in the last few years in the sense of much more investment money is going into this area. It looks pretty promising. A lot of new ideas, as we're seeing from this conference. It's looking a lot more promising than it was just a few years ago. In addition, we have artificial intelligence, which is finally doing something useful after decades of it really just being an idea that was hyped up and nothing happened. However, as soon as AI begins to become useful, people start panicking and saying we should be bombing data centers and stopping this thing. So, who knows if we'll actually be allowed to use this to improve the pace of research in biotechnology. Theories of aging. Don't be too confident your favorite theory is right, because there's an awful lot of theories that have come and gone, and more, and more, and more. So most of these have come and gone. Some of them may have been folded into later theories. It's not too encouraging. We've been through all these different theories, and you think, oh, well, this time, this one is right. But of course, there are many people in the past who said this one is right, and we've got it now, and it didn't really work out so well. So, hopefully we do have a really good handle on things, and yet, we have a lot of disagreement among people. At an alcohol conference in, I think it was 2015, I had, Aubrey and Josh Mitteldorf and Michael Rose. Three quite different approaches. They didn't agree with each other at all, which is interesting. They may actually be compatible in some way, but they didn't really agree. So we're not quite there yet in terms of a theory of aging, let alone treatments. All these treatments that have been tried, everybody getting very optimistic about taking this stuff. And this goes way back. This goes back at least to the ancient Chinese alchemists. Those guys, a few thousand years ago, they had both external alchemy and internal alchemy. They thought they could extend life. They were very explicit. They wanted to live longer. That was their goal. And these alchemists would go to the emperors and other royal people and offer them treatments. The external alchemy consisted basically of giving them things like lead and mercury and arsenic. That didn't work out too well. Interesting, it took generations before people finally said, I'm not sure this stuff works. It was pretty slow. But there's also internal alchemy, which consisted of practices like regular fasting, good posture, controlled breathing, frequent sex. Now, most of this stuff doesn't work. I'll take a prescription for frequent sex. Sorry, darling, it's doctor's orders. But, none of these things have really worked out too well. There's a couple of things at the bottom that, maybe we're still checking out. Maybe one of these will work out. So we have a term in cryonics, cryocrastination. When you say basically, yes, this is a good idea, it makes sense, I think I should make these arrangements, but I can wait, things are happening, I'm not too worried about it, and you put it off for a while. Well, I've seen over and over that becomes a really bad idea. There's all kinds of reasons why. For one thing, you may develop a medical condition and become uninsurable. Now, the vast majority of people, it's over 90% of people who make cryonics arrangements, use life insurance to pay for it, because it's just the easy way to do it. Of course, if you have a lot of cash, you could put it in a trust fund and take care of it that way. But by waiting, you risk becoming uninsurable. Or you leave it too late and it becomes too expensive if you're trying to build up with cash. Or something just happens. You have a heart attack or a fatal car crash. These things can happen at any time. It doesn't matter where that curve is. It can catch you by surprise, and then you're done for. I think of one case when I was president of Alcohol. We had a guy who, I think he was about 88 or 89 years old at the time. He had several $1 million, and apparently he started the sign-up process, then decided that he didn't want to pay membership dues. He got millions of dollars, a few $100s a year. 88, no, I can wait. Well, like 3 or 4 years later, we get a call from his family saying, he's dying, he's going to die like in a day or two, can you come and take care of him? Well, it's not great planning, guys. In that case, actually, we were able to do it primarily because he had previously applied, so we had his paperwork, we knew he had informed consent, the money was readily available. We managed to just squeak it under the wire there, but that's not at all recommended. It doesn't usually work out, I can tell you. So, yeah, don't think of it as a backup plan. Think of this as your emergency fund. Put it in place first. And even if we have longevity escape velocity, we've done it. We are now biologically immortal. Woohoo! You can still die. You're not really immortal. You may be biologically immortal in the sense that you're not really aging, but you're still mortal. You can still die from some diseases. Maybe not all of them have been cured. Maybe there's some new nasty ones that people have engineered deliberately. There are still accidents. You can still fall off a mountain if you're a mountaineer. You can still have a parachute failure. If you become a space explorer, something can happen up there. You could be killed by homicide, terrorist attack, and so on. So there's lots of things that can still kill you. In fact, I was looking at there's lots of different calculations. If we fixed aging today, how long would you expect to live based on current accident rates? And there's a lot of disagreement, but it looks like one plausible suggestion was around 8,000 years or so. Now, hopefully, we'll actually improve safety. If AI start driving cars, then maybe there'll be a lot fewer car accidents, for instance. Unless, of course, the people worrying about AI are right, in which case there'll be a lot more car accidents all at once as AI kills us all. But hopefully that's not the case. So, yeah, don't feel too confident about that. Now, fortunately, I don't have to do too much here because 2 previous speakers have covered some of this. I want to give a sense of progress in the field that I've actually been pretty frustrated for a while. As with life extension, as with space travel, right, for a long time, not a lot seemed to be happening. Now things are starting to happen. So I don't have to talk about vitrification, you know what that is. We've vitrified and rewarmed successfully a lot of different tissues, obviously eggs, sperm, embryos, which is quite impressive. I like to point out to people who are skeptical about vitrification or freezing in general, we just use the conventional term. I like to point out there are millions of people walking around today who are cryopreserved. They just happen to be embryos at the time. This is a particularly good argument if you're dealing with someone who has religious beliefs, because they usually insist that the soul enters the body at the point of conception. Well, that's already happened, so apparently you've got a soul. We've just cryopreserved it. We have it there for 30 years, and we bring it back. Do you really have a religious argument against that? It doesn't really work now, does it? So we've done corneas, heart valves, all kinds of different tissues. We can do all kinds of creatures now. Tardigrades have been found in permafrost, brought back after 46,000 years, and brought back, and they come back to life. And I think they use a natural cryoprotectant, tree hollows, a sugar. And then, yeah, a lot of these little tiny creatures have been discovered recently. Rotifers is another one. Just recently, there was a paper where rotifers came back after, I think, 26,000 years or so. So they're pretty hardy. Now, some of this has been covered. There's been progress with rabbit kidneys and rat kidneys. The rabbit kidneys was pretty tough, as Tanya was saying. It was done once, and then it was tough to repeat that. Rat kidneys, again, you've just seen the paper on that. 5 kidneys were able to be revived. It wasn't just a one-off. It was done 5 times, and it worked every time. So that's real progress. That's exciting. That means we're actually getting somewhere. But here we're talking about pretty small organs. We still have to scale that up to larger organs. And as again, the speakers have already mentioned, one problem is that it's not just the cooling down and getting things cryopreserved in good conditions, it's also rewarming rapidly enough if you want to bring people back. You have to rewarm very rapidly. In the experiments done with the rat kidneys, they used nano-warming, where they used iron particles, silica-based iron particles, and they rewarmed at a rate, I think it was like 46 degrees Celsius per minute, which is awfully fast. So you have to use some kind of electromagnetic radiation to do that. Now, that's hard to expand to larger tissues, like larger organs, obviously to whole human beings. Or there are people like Ramon Risco working on that, who believes he can actually extend that a lot further. I mentioned briefly aldehyde-stabilized cryopreservation. That's another thing that we're looking at more now. Robert McIntyre did some very interesting studies where basically he combined cryopreservation with aldehyde stabilization and took amazingly good electron micrographs of brain tissue. And he showed that everything looked fantastically good. Everything was intact. Everything that's based on what we know about how the memory is stored in the brain was there. So it was pretty hard to argue with that. Previously, it's been difficult because it's hard to get a good electron microscope image because the brain is kind of contracted when you take out the blood and so on. So it's kind of dark. But that shows that actually you can preserve things extremely well. There have also been some human brain studies that haven't been mentioned yet. The first one I would think of is Fred Chamberlain, who was the co-founder of Alcor, who had prostate cancer, moved from Florida to Arizona to be near the organization. He was in really good shape. He took care of himself. So despite the cancer, his vascular system was in really good shape. And we were right there at the bedside. There was zero delay. And because legally you can't take anything to end your life in Arizona right now, he took the tough path, which is basically to refuse food and water. After 6 days, which is pretty incredible to me, before his heart stopped, we were able to begin the process immediately. The CT scan showed that his brain was really well vitrified. That's not usually the case. It's usually partial vitrification. Another case from, 8 or 10 years ago now, Dr. Stephen Coles. Some of you may know that name from his work with the LA Gerontology Research Group. He was kind of saying, I don't want to do cryonics, don't want to do cryonics. Oh, I'm dying, I want to do cryonics. And he didn't have the funding for it, but we managed to work out something where he would let us do some unusual things like take some brain samples very carefully from certain parts of the brain. And we were able to look at that. And unfortunately, the paper has not yet been published. And I keep kicking the author and saying, when are you going to publish this thing? But I have seen the preliminary results at the Alcor conference last year. And it looks like from doing the differential scanning calorimetry and electron microscopy and various other methods, it looks like his brain tissue was preserved extremely well. Gregory Fay, again, possibly the world's leading cryobiologist, said that it looks amazingly good. So that's very encouraging. However, remember, these are mostly kind of laboratory situations, except for Fred Chamberlain. In many cases, you won't get such a good cryopreservation. And one thing we're trying to do at Biostasis Technologies is look for better methods and new methods, methods that can be adjusted to the circumstances. So for instance, if we know we can't get to a patient immediately, there's going to be a delay of several hours, which is not uncommon. You can't necessarily do anything about that. Maybe another method like aldehyde-stabilized cryopreservation is going to work better. So we're kind of looking at that. So the practical aspects of cryonics is very important, getting to the patient rapidly enough and be able to respond quickly enough. Okay, I'm running out of time, so quickly run through this. Another interesting experiment that hasn't been mentioned was with C. elegans. This was an experiment that my wife actually led, advised by Gregory Fay. And this was first of its kind, basically, to take a very small organism, to teach it a very basic task. They're not very bright. They're probably just a little brighter than Congress people, but only a little bit. So basically, with a chemical gradient, they figured out where to go for their food, over here rather than over here. They were then cryopreserved, rewarmed. They were held there for a while. I mean, really, you don't need to do it more than a second, but that doesn't sound very impressive to people, so you've got to hold them a bit longer. You can rewarm them very rapidly. And it turns out they remembered where to get their food, almost all of them. It was an amazing proof of principle that memory survived cryopreservation, at least in this one very simple organism. Okay, I'm going to have to skip over some of this stuff, but there's recent Nobel Prizes looking encouraging, cryo-electron microscopy. 2016 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for basically simple nanomachines, so the very beginning of nanotechnology, perhaps. But we need a lot more research, we need more funding, we need to make these methods work better, we need to improve how well people are preserved, and we need to move towards being able to reverse the process, obviously. So my goal, my advice really, regardless of whether you're a Plan A person or a Plan B person, is stay healthy. I mean, duh, but there's good reasons for that, right? The longer you survive, the better, hopefully, the cryopreservation or biostasis process will become. We get better at it over time. We get the vitrification. We get new processes. It should get better the longer you last, so keep going. Also, very importantly, people who are cryopreserved when they're in good shape, like Fred Chamberlain, has a good vascular system, he's going to get a much better result. If you don't take care of yourself and your vascular system is you're all clogged up or they're falling apart, we probably won't better vitrify your brain. You're probably getting a straight freeze or, at best, a partial cryopreservation. So my advice always is, and this will sound a little odd, but if you have to choose, try and get cancer. It's much better. With heart attack or stroke, bam, you might be asleep, nobody finds you for a bunch of hours. With cancer, you're in hospital, we're keeping an eye on you. I mean, cancer is much better. Cancer is good stuff, in context. So yeah, get your arrangements in place. If you want to know more about this, on Sunday evening, right after the end of the conference, between 7 and 11, just about 4 or 5 minutes walk from here, we are having an event at the, what is it called, the Bonsai Bar. And there'll be, Emil will be there, Ashwin will be there, a whole bunch of people talking about the frontiers of biopreservation and biostasis and cryopreservation. And if you want to make arrangements and you're European, you should talk to Emil. If you're US-based, I can make other suggestions. So please come along. If you come up to me, you can scan a QR code that gives you all the information. So thank you very much. Please make arrangements. I want to see you guys in the future. I don't want you to die. Thank you. Do we have any time for questions? Okay. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I was wondering whether there are other jurisdictions in which you could theoretically get better results, and maybe relatedly, whether there are what's called assisted dying, these kind of programs. Do governments think about biopreservation at all?
Yeah,
cryopreservation, sorry.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the US, we have actually already taken some advantage of that. Alcor has done, well, at least 2 cases that I know of, while I was still there, where people have used the death with dignity laws. I remember the first one. I was in the office, and a phone call came in, and the membership person picked up the phone, and the guy said, "I want to go next Wednesday. Can you be here?" And we said, "Whoa, hold on a little bit. Can we have a little bit more time? We've never done this before. We want to get it right." But that's what we did basically. In the end, we kind of set a date. That was our date. The team was there at the bedside. He took the medicine. After a few hours, his heart stopped. Legal death was declared. We could begin. That's a much better way of doing it than, bam, you go in your sleep, or it's some remote location and we can't get there for a long time. Now, it may be that places like Switzerland might be even better. That's difficult because of the location for us. Maybe Emil can solve that in Europe, being closer. Hopefully, that kind of law will spread, though, and I think it will. People are moving in that direction. So yeah, that makes a lot of difference. As I mentioned, animals we can do better. Pets we can actually cannulate them and get the process going before the heart stops. So there's very little delay, and they get a much better cryopreservation. My dog was done that way. We should better do that for humans. So yeah, I think we will move in that direction. I think having standby capabilities where our team can actually stand by in different locations is very helpful, rather than having one central response. Because some places are very bad to go down. Others are a lot better. It can be surprising, though. We had one guy actually kill himself in, not Georgia, it was one of those kind of states like Georgia. I don't think it was actually Georgia. But he called up, he made good arrangements. He decided that he couldn't stand it anymore. He was going to kill himself, and he very carefully shot himself in the chest because he was a neuro patient. And he left ample evidence that he was, that's exactly what he wanted to do. There's no homicide involved. And we got there, and the police said, "Well, we reckon it's pretty clear what happened. You can take him." And so we did, and we actually got him cryoprotected. It was kind of amazing, but that's not recommended. No. Yeah.
Thank you, Max, for this provocative speech. Hello, here. So one remark and one question. The remark is, well, sadly, I agree with you concerning the evolution of life expectancy and science for life expectancy the last years. But it's also the same situation concerning the progress of cryogenization, So about 70 years ago, hamsters were frozen and came back to life. And we are not really further than that. Even
well, they weren't frozen. A certain percentage of the body water was frozen. They weren't entirely frozen. They couldn't have been returned.
No, they were not entirely frozen. I agree, but they were 60% frozen and came back to life. And now we are not able to do that. No, we don't do better, at least. Not even the same. But okay, that's the remark.
Well, I think what I've shown that's obviously not correct, because we can do a lot better. We can do all these animal organs we couldn't do before, and we could do it repeatedly now. That was not something that ordinary scientists could do back then. So I think we have made progress, but we haven't made enough progress. I agree. That's why we need more research to go into.
You cannot at the moment take a rat, froze it, and came back to life.
No, we can't really do any large.
And it was done 70 years ago. Okay, but
no, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing to do. It was partially frozen. It's not the same thing.
Okay, but even partially freeze, you cannot do it today. That's what I say. Okay,
well,
but
well,
anyway,
again, I have to make the point that cryonics is a two-part process, right? You've got to cryopreserve someone right now, but you can wait to bring them back. So in some sense, that doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't, because we don't have to fix the problem of reviving them today. Right? More rapid rewarming, avoiding those kind of problems. We can work on those while you're cryopreserved. You're not going anywhere.
Let's discuss about this later privately. We don't agree, but we agree to disagree. Now, my question is...
but quickly, because we're running out of time.
My question is how... of course, we want to save our lives, but first we want to save the lives of all people, you know? So the big question, ethical question for me is, if you prioritize cryogenization, are you not going to slow down research for life extension? Of course, you can go in both directions. You can think no, you can think yes, but can you answer what you really think?
I don't see any reason why you would slow it down. I think the more interested in life extension in general, and this is one form of life extension, the better. It's not really competitive here. You can take money from many other areas that are much less useful and put it into both. And there's a lot of crossover between them too, and better understanding of biology and the tissues. Regenerative medicine is going to be relevant to both of those, so I don't really see that as a competition. I think it really works well together. Do you have time for one more? Okay. Callum?
He hasn't asked a question yet.
Okay.
Is it short? Better be short. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And this is by no means an argument against cryonics, as I am a supporter, but I do wonder if the Plan A concept could lead some people to prematurely end their lives, as you've said, with the death via dignity laws, which may not make sense from a probabilistic standpoint, because let's say you're, quote, terminally ill under the current definition, but you might have, say, a 0.5% chance of survival, whereas if you enter a cryonic suspension, your probability of future revival could have a very wide range from, say, 0.01% to 90%, but you don't know what that is in advance. So isn't there a danger of, let's say, relinquishing a known certainty, which is the fact of one's present existence?
Yeah. I don't think really, because first of all, you can't do this unless, at least most jurisdictions I know, you have to be within 6 months of dying anyway before you're allowed to do this. That's usually the case. So you can't really hurry it up too much. I mean, in the suicide case, that was because it was suicide. It wasn't something that was planned as a medical thing. It's because he just couldn't bear to live any longer, but had the idea that we can solve his problems in the future. So it's a little bit different. So I don't think that's an issue, because you can't really hurry it up too much. But it has to be a personal decision. If you put yourself in the place of someone who's absolutely miserable, who's suffering appalling agony, who's choking on their own fluids in their lungs, who am I to say, no, buddy, go on, buck up. You've got to keep going longer because something good could happen. I can't really do that. So I think we have to leave that as an individual decision. But everybody has to make that trade-off, but hopefully an informed one. But that's a good question. Any more? Yeah?
When I tried to sign up for life insurance in the US, it was very, very difficult. Is there any progress on that you can easier sign up, or like on, I don't know, some services that help you walk through that? I thought that was the most painful part, and I think that's usually what leads or exacerbates cryocrastination.
Yeah, I shouldn't be too difficult. I mean, first of all, the insurance companies don't have a problem with it. You don't really have to tell them. But generally, apart from one we had some issue with, they don't really worry about it, because it's just the same kind of economics for them. It doesn't make a difference what the purpose is. I'm not sure what the difficulty might have been. Certainly, there are ways of making it easier. For instance, tomorrow Biostasis has a plan where you can sign up very easily, with a few clicks, and they provide some basic term insurance. Now, I've always been kind of down on term insurance because it's a terrible waste of money in general. 97% of the time it doesn't pay out. It runs out after 10 or 20 years, whatever the term is. But the benefit of that is it gets you going, it gets you funded, and it's much easier, and it's very cheap. So it's a good way to start. I just say if you do term insurance, which should be a lot easier, make sure you have upgradable term insurance where they can switch you to a whole life or some other policy, universal policy, without another medical exam, because again, you could become uninsurable in the meantime. So if you have trouble with a more expensive policy that's actually better in the long run, maybe try a term policy. I think Alco kind of frowns on those, but tomorrow Biostasis seems to be doing quite well with those. Okay, thank you.